The sixth item is wrongful dismissal and employment practices. And again, 20 or 30 years ago, it was unheard of that a minister or a church secretary or an employee of a charity would sue their employer. The last 20 years or so have taught us that these kinds of claims can happen anywhere and do happen anywhere. Certainly, I challenge you to think about this. When you, for example, in a church, go to terminate a minister, possibly for good reason, in this day and age, in all likelihood, depending on the reason for that termination, he may not have a pulpit again in his life. It is his profession, and depending on what the nature of the termination was, it might cause him to lose his credentials, to be terminated as your employee, and never to find work in his chosen field again. And this is the reason why sometimes, even though Christians talk a lot about not suing other Christians, some people find themselves in positions where they feel they have no alternative. So we see this more regularly, and it does certainly reinforce the point that when you as a charity hire employees, you should be doing so with full knowledge of your responsibilities as an employer, so that up front you have an employment contract, that you have that person's consent, that they agree to your statement of faith and your lifestyle expectations, and that if they don't meet those minimum standards, that is grounds for termination. Because in Canada, although courts do recognize religious freedom and allow organizations to make decisions based on statement of faith, they will not interpret Scripture for us. It's not going to happen. We have a challenge enough with that within our own churches. But what they will do is enforce contract law. And so a challenge to local church boards is to understand going forward that although that minister may be a credential holder, an ordained minister of your denomination, at the end of the day, you are the employer. And if they are terminated, any sort of action that they allege has been done wrongfully will go against your board. And so it is important to recognize your responsibilities in making sure that the understanding is very clear and contractual. Sources of litigation, certainly employees, prospective employees that you maybe don't hire, and contract workers can sue as well. I'll mention, and this is a very unusual thing, surprises people, but we've actually had dismissal claims from volunteers, and one in particular that was successful. And people go, well, why is that? They're not getting paid. What have they lost? Well, there was a case with a church volunteer who was very high profile, associated with a particular event that happened in the church and in the community each and every year. They were so high profile that their picture was always appearing in the paper at that time of the year with this event, and it was promoting the church, and it was very positive, and it was a great step forward for the church. But unfortunately, to the board's disappointment, at a certain point they found out that this person was involved in personal activity, in personal behavior that could not be accepted within the church's beliefs and lifestyle expectations. The board approached this person about that behavior. He did nothing about it. He didn't address it. At a certain point, they removed him from this volunteer position. He resigned from the church. They didn't hear anything further from him until about 6 months later, at which point they received a statement of claim against the church for economic damages for him being dismissed as a volunteer. Now, what were the damages based on? Well, as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story is this. He owned auto dealerships in the area. A lot of his business was related to the church, members, adherents, their referrals. In that period after his dismissal, his business dropped off, and he was claiming for damages. Now, he never agreed to be a volunteer based on statement of faith or lifestyle expectations or anything else he signed. But that's the basis that he was removed on. And that case, although it didn't go to court, was settled in his favor. Again, it's the difference between contractual and the difference between interpreting Scripture. Okay? So again, outside of employment contracts, this is also a good reason why you should either have your volunteers only being members who have signed covenants, or if you have volunteers that are not members, that they sign volunteer covenants and ministry agreements, agreeing to uphold your organization's statement of faith and lifestyle expectations. It should be part of a standard volunteer application that addresses other things like asking their consent for criminal record checks if they're working with children and so forth. Okay. Wrongful dismissal in general, though, is primarily an employment issue, and the proper source of insurance coverage is, as I've mentioned earlier, a director's and officer's liability policy. Certainly in terms of thinking about issues related to employment practices, it is necessary as well for your organization, for your board members to understand that you do have employer obligations. You should be aware of your statutory obligations when it comes to overseeing employees, terminating them, understanding E.S.A. standards, employment equity standards. You should probably, if you're a large organization, have an employee handbook, certainly employee contracts, and do performance reviews, and have some sort of a workplace harassment policy as well. One of the things I'll mention here is that in our experience, one of the challenges in Christian ministries is that oftentimes employers, board members, don't like to be blunt and upfront with their employees over employment performance issues. Whether it's out of kindness, whether it's trying to be charitable, but these issues tend to go on without the employee receiving a very clear understanding of what the issues are about their performance. And then suddenly, after a long time, the board says, this is enough, we can't have this person around here, they're not doing their job, we're going to have to terminate them. A lot of people just accepted at that. But I will say this as a caution, if they do sue for wrongful dismissal, and they haven't been given advance notice and an opportunity to address the deficiencies in their performance, they will have a very good wrongful dismissal case against you. So just like any other employer, it's important for churches to be very upfront, open, and honest in their communication with employees, not to be aggressive, but rather to communicate what the issues are so that that employee has an opportunity to address them and resolve them.